What's up, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Seahawks Forever. A little something different today, a little afternoon delight, depending on which time zone you're at. A little live show in the afternoon, and there's a reason for that. Fingers crossed, may have a very special surprise guest joining us in a little bit. But first, let me tell you what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about the comp pick game. This is something that John Schneider has played on and off again throughout his tenure as the GM in Seattle. Different organizations view this in a different way. Some like to consistently play the comp pick game, while others just believe that you just get as many good players as you can every offseason and try to put it together that way instead of having to wait. But I've noticed over the last couple of weeks, as this has become a talking point among fans, that there are some misconceptions and some confusion about how it works and the rules. So we're going to look at that, and then we're kind of zoom out, take a look at the big picture, and ask why this year this makes sense for this team, where they are and where they're headed. And then we'll take it a step further and kind of expand it and look at some possibilities after the draft and some free agents that may still be available at that point once the comp pick formula is no longer in play. And then if our special guest does arrive, we'll bounce some things off him, get some thoughts from him on the whole process, and open it up for your questions as well. This is Seahawks Forever.
Welcome to the Seahawks Forever podcast. In-depth analysis on everything Seahawks. And now, here's your host, Dan Viens.
Hey guys, if you're also Mariner fans, which I know a lot of Seahawk fans are, do me a favor, head over to Mariners Forever. The link is down below, or you can just type Mariners Forever into the search bar on YouTube. Firing that up again, lost the channel for a couple months, that whole hacking thing, but it's back. Did a video a couple days ago on the Mariners' questions facing them on the fifth starter situation with Bryson Miller out. Cooper Criswell, one of the guys involved in that. He's pitching today for them down in Arizona. If you would just hop over there, help me build the channel, hit that subscribe button, and that way you won't miss any content. We'll be doing at least weekly shows as we head now into the season, including a full off season, or my full season preview coming up next week. I also want to encourage you to get on over to the Patreon channel, because right now through the month of March, calling it March Madness. I just made that up. Never heard it before. Thought it was really catchy, and I love alliteration. 20% off your first month, or 20% off an annual subscription. And what do you get over there? And why do I call it Northwest Forever? Because it includes all of my content under one roof. All the Seahawks Forever stuff, Mariners Forever, a new spin-off show coming up soon. Stay tuned for that, as well as exclusive material, Hawks Film Lab, bonus content, all the audio podcasts. You get access to my Substack, where I'll be posting a lot of draft profiles and things as we move forward, as well as access to our Discord so we can chat about it every single day. Also, another shout out for Derek Coleman over at All22 Films and his new draft website, draftsignal.pro. Absolutely check it out. It is a gorgeous website, absolutely free. We're still populating profiles as we go. I'm contributing some scouting over there. Just sent him a bunch of edge stuff. I've got some cornerback and running back profiles up over there too, but it's just a beautiful website. Definitely check that out if you would. All right, so what does the compensatory formula mean? What do comp picks mean? This is what they mean. Let's do this first. These are some of the rules. It gets even more complex than this, but these are the basic rules that do get lost a little bit, I think, sometimes in translation. So it's basically there's a maximum of 32 comp picks that the NFL will hand out every single year. And so sometimes you try to play this game and you get X'd out because the 32 have already been filled. So it's not necessarily if all 32 teams lose 4 good free agents and don't replace them with like free agents, well, the math probably doesn't work out on that. They would cancel out. So only qualifying unrestricted free agents count. What that means is you have to be a true unrestricted free agent, which means your previous contract with the team that you played for expired and that you're a qualifying veteran. You'll hear terms like restricted free agents and exclusive right restricted free agents. And teams have to tender those players. We saw it here we've seen it with Jake Bobo. George Holani just signed his exclusive rights tender yesterday. Drake Thomas was tendered and then extended. Well, if the Seahawks had chosen not to tender those players, like they have with some others, they then are free agents by definition, but not unrestricted. And if they're non-tendered, they don't count against the comp pick formula. Case in point, Emmanuel Wilson, recently non-tendered by the Green Bay Packers. Thus, the Seahawks could sign him without it impacting the comp formula. It's based on a number of things. Salary, as it says there, snaps, honors, like all-pro, things like that, postseason honors, and average annual value. It has to be a significant enough contract in order to qualify for a comp pick, anywhere between the 3rd and the 7th rounds. For example, this year, we are projected to gain a 4th round pick from Kenneth Walker and 3 5th round picks for Boye Mafe, Reek Woolen, and Kobe Bryant. To get into the 3rd round pick, which I know a lot of fans were hoping for with some of these deals, you had to be over like $25 million this year. The formula changes every year because the cap keeps going up. So it's a percentage of cap. It's not just, one AAV doesn't carry over from one year to the next. So that's where the Seahawks stand right now. And as we sit here today, they are projected to have 12 picks in next year's class because, and I had forgotten about this, they still have a 7th rounder coming to them from the Atlanta Falcons for the Michael Jarrell deal. Also, there's a cutoff. Once the draft comes and goes, then all the comp pick formula rules go away, and you can sign anybody without it counting. There's also a minimum or a maximum salary, and so the deals the Seahawks have signed to this point, good example, Emmanuel Wilson, I think he can earn up to about $2.1 million. Even if he had been an unrestricted free agent, that wouldn't qualify. So as we sit here today, the Seahawks are looking forward to 12 picks in next year's draft. And to talk about this a little bit and then kind of get into why they are obviously pursuing this path, going to bring in my buddy, Jeff Simmons from Real Hawk Talk. Jeff, how are you, bud?
I'm all right, man. How are you?
Good. We were supposed to catch up last week. I was under the weather and couldn't make it happen that morning. But before we kind of get into this comp pick stuff, you've had a busy couple of months, man, since the last time we talked. I am jealous. I've just been kind of living my life vicariously through you the last couple of months. You got to go to the Super Bowl. Tremendous fan support for that. That was really cool to see. And then you got to attend the scouting combine last week as well, or 2 weeks ago, I guess it is now. Time flies this time of year. Saw you out there interviewing a bunch of guys. First, just tell me about the Super Bowl experience. I can't wait to hear how that was for you.
That was just the most surreal thing I've been to. And really, it was just...
Sorry, I had a little echo there. I had the wrong setting, but we should be good now.
You hearing me better now?
Yep.
Okay, I was wondering if the echo was my thing.
No, that was my bad.
So we were trying to find ways to get us tickets for the Super Bowl, and I finally worked myself up to paying for it. I was like, you know what, I got to do this. It's the one time. And then Brian, my co-host, surprises me with this GoFundMe thing, which covered my ticket and my hotel. And I was like, I couldn't believe the generosity of our listeners. And so anyway, just being there was crazy because I don't know if people know my background. Like my dad was a pretty big sports writer in Toronto where I live, and he's covered everything from like boxing events in Vegas to NBA finals. He's done like 20 Olympics. And the one thing he's always told me about the Super Bowl is it's not a great event to be at live. He's always said he's covered at least 15 Super Bowls. He's always said it's kind of a crappy event because it's a corporate crowd. And so I've got in there being like, you know what, like I can't let that idea. And I got there, and almost from when I landed in San Francisco, there were Seahawks fans everywhere. And this went against everything my dad ever told me. Like, this felt like a Seahawks game. And it was so cool to be there. Like, our seats were really good, but like, I felt like I was at a Seahawks playoff game. And it was just so surreal to be in that crowd and see them win it. And it's like, even just watching the Super Bowl broadcast after, it's like, you don't feel all that stuff. Being in that crowd, I just look at those pictures on my phone sometimes and seeing the confetti, but like, when watching the celebration, it's not easy from the crowd. It was like you can barely see anything, but like they basically had to ask. It was me and Rob Staten were there from London, and they basically had to ask us to leave because I didn't want to leave. It was just
yeah.
And getting it was fuzzy. So I was leaving the stadium, and anyone who's ever been to that stadium, I don't want to sound like these are first world problems, but it is a nightmare to get out of. I stayed at a hotel like 9 minutes away, and it took about an hour and a half to get back there.
Wow.
And so I'm literally like. And I was late leaving the stadium. I'm walking to the Uber station. We're trying to get an Uber out of there or a Lyft out of there. And I literally see like Zach Miller walk by, like scrambling. And I'm like, hey man. And like I introduced myself and we talked for a little bit, but he was like, and then Ricardo Laquette like comes by and like he's flustered because there's no way out of there.
Damn.
And I saw like a couple other Jonathan Hankins was walking by, and like everyone's just kind of like, what do we do here? So at the end of the game, it was kind of weird because like you're so excited, you're so hyped, and it's like I can't get out of here. And so that was surreal. The combine was a whole different experience, and I have known some people who's gone over the years. I've always wanted to go, and Brian was able to get me access in there this year. It took a lot of work, but it's a really anyone who can ever get down there. It's one of the coolest weeks I've seen. I know you guys were down at the Senior Bowl. I imagine it's the same thing. Where Indianapolis as a city is just, it's a really small city, the downtown area. There's like 4 streets. And the weird part about it is like they're all steakhouses.
Yeah.
There's like no other kinds of restaurants other than steakhouses and sports bars.
Yeah.
And like you're walking into a steakhouse and you'll see like, we're sitting for dinner. I was sitting at the bar one night and right behind me is like John Fox, who's now with the Bills, just having a steak. And you literally see Terry Crews, the actor, just comes walking out of the same restaurant.
Oh, man.
And it's the NFL is such a small world, and you'll literally be walking in the street. I was walking to grab lunch one day, and Jesse Minter just walks by, and I like casually just ask him about Mike McDonald, and he sees my media thing. He gives me a couple answers, and it's just the NFL is such a small world, and you'll literally be walking like there's a Starbucks. All the teams stay at this one JW Marriott, and so we went in there just to like have a drink, and literally Greg Cosell walks by, sits down with us, has a beer, and starts talking about players. And I'm like, how the hell does this guy even know who I am? And he probably didn't, but like,
just wants to
all these writers, these writers start coming to talk to him, and I'm just sitting there. So I got to meet a couple beat writers. Like I met the ESPN Giants guy and the Denver. It's just you see all these college reporters now are getting access to it, and a lot of the NFL people leave pretty early. So if you're like us and you're into the draft, you can get some really good access because most people will leave. Like a lot of Seahawks writers left after 2 days. Even John Schneider left after 2 days. I think he said it on his radio show. So you just see people everywhere. And whether you go for dinner or whether you're just hanging around the media center, literally people are just walking through there. And if you have it's a very weird environment, but you just see how small the NFL world is. If you go into this JW Marriott, all the media drinks on one side and all the teams are on one side. So I went in there one night after dinner just to check it out. And I'm walking to one side and I'm like, I probably shouldn't be here. And I walked in and I see like Jay Harbaugh's there with his buddies having beers. Leslie Frazier's talking to all these older NFL people in like the lobby. Brian Fleury was walking around. And then I woke to the bar and you see like Ted Wynn is there and Danny Kelly and those guys. And it's just like, this whole thing is just, I understand why everyone talks about it being so fun, But some guys will go there and they're just like Dane Brugler is just like working like a dog, and you can see him.
He's a worker.
Stacey Dales was really impressive. I got to see her. She was one of the only reporters who would go into the scrums with the prospects and ask. Like, everyone in these prospects will ask, "Have you met with this team? Have you met with this team?" And she's out there like asking like real questions, and so it was just really cool to see. And you can really get a sense of like who's kind of full of themselves, who kind of talks to like the everyday people. Like it was very surreal. If you're like a people watcher like I am, you learn a lot about some of these media people very quickly.
Let me do this because and you touched on it. I really appreciate the value of the combine interviews and how extensive they are, because I save that until closer to the draft. I kind of try to do as much of my scouting as I can ahead of time, just based on traits and tape. But then you got to add that piece in, because we know how important that is to the Seahawks evaluation process. They scout the person as much as they do the player. And the more we learn, with each year, we get a little more data, and we learn like, okay, this guy's not going to be on their board. That guy's not going to be on their board. And sometimes it's not as simple as like looking through their bio and finding out if they were team captains or, that kind of stuff. It's just how they come across in these interviews. With that in mind, like, are there 2 or 3 names that really stand out, regardless of positional need, that you just, within a couple of seconds of listening to maybe the first answer from them, you thought, well, Schneider's going to love this guy?
Yeah, there was a couple. D'Angelo Pons. I know he's so small, and I know it's hard to make it work with Witherspoon.
Yeah, because he is Devin he's like Devin Witherspoon minus 2 inches. That's
the thing. Like, how much the Seahawks love Witherspoon, and when you're hearing him talk, you're just like, I bet they would love to have that guy on the team. He was really good. A receiver, Elijah Sarrett from Indiana.
Oh yeah,
I think it's like a 3rd round level prospect. He came across as just so smart, so polished. Kind of reminded me of like Ibuka, the way he spoke last year. And I was watching some of those interviews. I don't know if the Seahawks have a big need for receiver. Obviously, there's a ton of money there. But he just really captivated me in terms of he was just a really smart, well-spoken guy. And I was pretty impressed with just his confidence. And I was at the Mekhi Lemon presser that kind of went viral. And I remember thinking, like, ooh, that guy was kind of weird. And then I had no idea until like 2 days later that the whole internet was talking about him, because it was weird. Someone asked him about like one of his teammates at corner. And one of the things some of the veteran reporters told me, like, if you want to get these guys talking, ask them about their teammates. And so someone asked him about that. He kind of just stared into space and didn't really say anything. I was like, that was the strangest. I'm like, and then he went viral. But yeah, I thought Colton Hood as well. He's a cornerback. I talked to a lot of the cornerbacks.
Yeah.
I thought he came off just really kind of quietly confident, really well-spoken, self-assured. Funny enough, he said his brother was a Seahawks fan, and he said literally he had Mike and some of the coaches call his brother. And I'm just like, I don't know if that guy's going to make it to 32, but I really liked talking to him.
It's interesting you bring him up, because I'm really struggling with this corner class. Not struggling with the class itself. It's very, very good. But in particular, it just seems like there's this clump of 3 to 4 guys that are pretty consistently projected to be available at 32, some more than others. And it's Avion Terrell, it's Brandon Cisse, it's Colton Hood, and it's Chris Johnson. And first of all, those guys are so remarkably physically similar. They're all kind of the same height and weight.
It's the same build, right?
Similar movement skills. Like, it's hard to kind of tell them apart, but then they all interview really well too, and they all play the run. Like, they all feel like Seahawks.
And that was the thing. I interviewed the day I was kind of alone at the combine. I got to talk to all the corners. And every one of the corners in that range had all met with the Seahawks. And what I found interesting is they were glowingly talking about the Seahawks. And if you went down there like 2 years ago, and I didn't, but like I bet if you brought up the Seahawks, you probably would have got some of the looks when people would bring up the Panthers. Like, right. Oh, yeah, sure, I met with them. That was cool. But like every one of them. And again, they all had kind of a different story that connected. Like, Brandon Cease was at the NFC Championship.
Mm-hmm.
He was teammates. He's buddies with Nicky Manwari. So they played 7-7 football together.
Yeah.
Terrell's the guy I really like. I think he's my favorite of the group in terms of just upside. I don't think he's making the 32.
Nah, it doesn't seem like it.
I don't think
It's
so.
about
I think
one out about every 5 mocks I see have him lasting that long.
if he makes it, for me, you turn on the card, you don't think twice. But he just was like he had like that like Georgia confidence, and like he was kind of cocky, but he wasn't in a bad way. And his brother, he reminded me a lot of his brother, and his brother was like 16th overall pick. He's been a really good player in Atlanta. I think he'll go in that range somewhere in the teens. But yeah, the thing when I do these mock draft simulators or I'm trying to figure it out, I like that whole group too. And that's where I think the ideal strategy, and I don't know if there'll be a buyer for this, but I think the Seahawks can slide down a little from 32 down.
Yeah.
Kind of take one of those corners and then add some mid-round stock back. It's ideal. Again, is there going to be someone moving to move up to 32 this year?
Right. Yeah.
But even when I do the mock draft simulators, I find like when the corners all get cleaned out and you end up at 64, I find I'm not as excited. I really like that group. I think the ideal strategy for me is to take one of those guys if you can't move off 32.
Yeah, I agree. I think it works better every time. And even the trade down scenario in most years, as much as I might like the idea of adding extra picks, when I move down from the early spot, I'm missing out on multiple guys that I just feel like are kind of crucial to target. I don't feel that way this year. I never move down to, the popular ones are 38 with Houston, 39 with Cleveland. There's a pretty clear match to get a 4th rounder back in both those cases. I don't feel like I missed out on anybody, like, because that clump is so even, it always works out after that. So the reason we're talking so much about the draft now, and it's still 5 weeks away, is because essentially free agency's over.
That's great.
It's amazing how quickly, it seemed to move quicker this year than ever. All we heard leading up to it was, well, it's kind of a mediocre, sort of a lukewarm free agent class. Well, I think by day 3, Greg Rosenthal's top 100 available, he only had 27 left or something like that, really picked through. And in particular, the Seahawks just appear to be done. Like the only news we're getting every day is when they actually sign the guys that they agreed to deals with last week, and then they show up to town and they're actually signing them. So it sure seems like they're done. And we're going to talk about how that relates to the comp pick idea in just a moment. But just generally, assuming they are done, basically until the draft, how do you feel about what they've done so far?
I think it's fine. I think for the most part, it's fine. I think the one spot still leaving me a little uncomfortable is running back. But I think of all the deals in free agency, the one I still can't wrap my head around is that Tyler Algier went for so little. But yep. I think it leads to the bigger picture of what you're talking about today. But I think overall they were sensible. I don't think there's a contract out there that I would say they really should have done. I think the contracts they brought in, I think Job was one of the better contracts in all of free agency. I think what shocked me is the amount of bottom of the roster players they've been able to keep. Because usually what happens I was studying this a couple of weeks ago and because everyone was trying to isolate the Seahawks problems to them. But this happens to every Super Bowl team. They get picked apart in free agency. Why? Because teams want to replicate the champion. And even 2013, they lost Browner, Thurman. They had to cut Chris Clemens and Red Bryant. They lost Golden Tate. They lost Breno Giacomini. They lost Chris Maragos. Mike Robinson retired.
Yeah.
And they weren't the same team the next year. They were still good. But they missed they lost a lot of depth. I looked at the Seahawks this year. I'm like, well, they're going to lose some frontline starters, but their depth should be okay. But I was shocked still at the level. You usually see the Josh Joneses of the world. Someone's going to be I want that guy to start. Yeah. This contract came out today. It's 1 year, $4 million, same contract as last year. Shocking to me. And the amount of just special teams, bottom of the roster players they've been able to keep, I think that's very rare and pretty cool. Overall, yeah, I was surprised they got Shaheed back. I think everything was pointing the other way. I thought Kobe Bryant would have been the one that might have come back, but I think there's a lot of people that were upset about Riq Woolen. I think all the tea leaves were pretty clear on that. Boye Mafe, I was kind of leading the charge that he's going to get more money than you think. He still surpassed what I thought by a couple million, maybe $4 million a year. And I know Michael Sean Dugar shared some of the over the cap projections. Those weren't even close.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the guys who I thought would get paid got paid. Look, John Schneider does not make outside free agency very interesting typically. I know last year he did a great job in it. if you were hoping for outside free agents, this had to be the most boring free agent period. Maybe after Rodney Thomas and Emmanuel Wilson, probably not the guys to get you jacked up, but I think there is a bigger strategy here that the Seahawks were really disciplined about. We did a show on our show the Saturday before free agency, and we each came up with an offseason outside free agent plan for all their positions they were going to lose. And we were both laughing after. We're like, that was the most boring episode we've ever had. We were talking about like Von Miller and like 35-year-old guys and Tyler Algier. We're like, these are not the so we were laughing because we thought we were going to get yelled at, but their plan ended up being financially responsible is not exciting stuff. It's like talking about investing in retirement. Like if you went to a meeting with your friends and talked about investing in retirement, I don't think your buddies would get excited. So that's kind of where they're at. And this comp pick thing, you can see it is definitely part of their planning. I have had questions about that kind of planning over the years, but you can see they've been so disciplined in terms of who they've signed, who they've targeted, the numbers they've targeted. This is a big part of what they're doing.
Yeah, and here's some of the reasons why it makes sense. They just have 4 picks in 2026, no 4th, no 5th, no 7th. Next year, we've been hearing this for 2 years, really, that 2027 projects to be a loaded draft, better than we've seen in several years. So right now, as I mentioned at the top, we're projected to have 12 picks if we hold on to our comp picks, and plus the Michael Jarrell pick, which is a nice little bonus. Forgot about that. The 7th from Atlanta. And then this is why, none of these guys that are left on the market that might qualify as going towards the formula make sense, because anyone they would sign now that would qualify would cancel out one of the picks that they already have. Exactly. And then once we get to the draft, after the draft, and I actually thought it was later than this. I always thought it was closer to the June 1st kind of cutoff, but it's literally the Monday after the draft is done. Any remaining free agents can be signed with no penalty at all. So it really, when you start to look ahead, when you look at the work they still have left to do, they really want to get Spoon and JSN extended this year. You need money for that. They've got about 40 million-ish in cap space remaining right now. They have about another 57 million they could access if they need to by restructuring some veteran deals. So if they don't sign or trade for any more significant free agents now, they're sitting pretty with the ability to extend both those guys, not hurt yourself in the future. So let's take a little lighter draft class this year. I think the projection is only about $3 million that it's going to affect the cap with where their picks are. And let's take a look at next year to really restock the cupboards in what's a better draft. Do you like the approach?
I think it's logical. For me, the one thing I have questions about is like, you're in a Super Bowl window. Are you really valuing 5th round picks in 2027 over winning that? And so maybe they just won the Super Bowl and this is part of John Schneider's 3-year model. But for my view is I'd rather have good players than 5th round picks down the road. However, I heard James Gladstone, the GM of the Jaguars, talking about it the other day. And he actually, I think if you're going to question kind of my stance on it, I had heard one thing that was new in the last couple of years is you can now trade comp picks once you get them. So for moving up in the draft, that becomes very valuable. I heard James Gladstone say something that I really hadn't considered. And he said one of the reasons they're playing the same game, they haven't really signed anyone in free agency.
He just flat out came out and said it.
And he said the reason we're doing that is not just to accumulate more capital. It's that if we need to make trades either in preseason or in season, knowing these picks are going to come, we're more likely to make a move. And he talked about last year, they traded for Tim Patrick and they traded for Jacoby Myers because they knew that they had extra capital coming from other things. And I hadn't really considered that, to be fair. And look, we saw what Seattle did with Rashid Shaheed, and we've seen what they've done with Ernest Jones and Leonard. Having the extra capital isn't just preparing for a 5th round pick. It's giving yourself more stock. And look, the 2027 draft, I know everyone's always like, next year's better. It's absolutely a better draft than 2026 is not a great draft. And the frontline talent next year is like Jeremiah Smith will be eligible. Arch Manning will be eligible. Just the frontline talent is way better than this one. If you have like the 3rd pick if you're Arizona in this draft, you're probably so bummed. Like you're looking at like David Bailey or the guy, the tackle from Miami, like.
And it features premium positions, which is what's lacking this year. We might see 2 inside. Well, not might. We're going to see 2 inside linebackers. We're going to see so many non-premium positions go in the top 10, top 15. That's what really defines this class. But I think when you look ahead to next year, it's, the depth obviously is going to push better players down to the Seahawks, where they're going to be drafting, we presume, at the end of each round or near the end, which makes that trade flexibility that those comp picks bring you even more important. Maybe there is a guy they think could be a game-changing player for them at a position of need, and maybe you got to get up to 20 to get him. Well, having an extra fourth and 3 extra fifths will help you do that, or at least help offset the loss if you have to give up a higher pick than that. But here's the downside potentially that I want to get your thoughts on as well. This is a weaker class. They only have 4 picks in this class currently, although, as you touched on, I expect him to try as hard as he has ever tried to trade down in this class. And he might have to take a little less value than the trade charts usually suggest, because the demand might not be there. However, as we sit here today, because they're being more conservative and not going out and signing guys that might compete for starting jobs at the positions of need that we can all agree on, corner, edge, and running back, you're kind of having to do the Gray Zabel thing and count on finding significant contributors in a weaker draft class. Like, that's the part that gives you pause, right?
Yeah, I'll say a couple positions, like corner lines up. Like, there are corners where you're going to be drafting at 32, 64. Some people really like the depth of edge rushers in this draft. I'm not quite sold on a lot of the edge rushers available at 32, but maybe 64. But I think the plan that would make sense is if you come away and like the edge rushers don't fall to you, I think after the draft, if you want to keep your comp picks, you'll still be able to find there's going to be a group of older edge rushers like a Von Miller.
You mentioned it.
Jadeveon Clowney, Kyle Van Noy. I think your plan kind of lines up that if you don't get one in the draft, you have a clear plan.
Yeah.
Corner, I think you better draft one. You sign Job, which allows you sign the kid from Auburn who he was a first round pick from Miami. He gives you some depth. Nehemiah Pritchett's still there. I don't think you're going to see those names that you're seeing at edge. Running back, I guess they could always potentially turn another way if the draft doesn't fall their way. The one thing I'm left is like, well, what do they do here at running back if the draft gets away from them?
Yeah, the running back thing is fascinating, and it's funny that you mentioned these guys earlier, because this is exactly what I had prepared. And I think that it makes a lot of sense. And I've thought this for a couple of weeks now, even before free agency started, that the plan that made sense is get yourself. There were a couple of guys in the class, like I was an Arnold Ebiketie believer, but I don't know that, and for the money he signed, I thought that was a really doable contract. Probably would have canceled out your 5th rounder, I think, if I remember the AAV.
It would have, yeah.
Yeah, but still, I really like his upside, and for pennies on the dollar compared to what Mafe was bringing you out of the same draft class. But these are guys that have value because they're ring chasers, right? These are guys that they understand that every year they play might very well be their last. And these are all guys that have proven to have a little bit left in the tank, even at their older age too. Some of them have connections to Mike McDonald and have played in his scheme before. And they would sign for cheap. They'd be 1-year deals. There's some value in that, but then let's pair it with a draft pick. And what I find fascinating, the more I dig into this class and actually start to write up some formal profiles and do deeper tape study, is my perceptions are changing a little bit. Like, the edge class and the running back class have some similarities. The edge class is a lot deeper. There's a lot more volume there, but they're all unfinished players. They're all they all lack something. They all leave you wanting something more. There just aren't a lot of complete players in this draft. I chalk some of that up to the fact it's a much younger draft class. Like, the COVID guys are gone. These kids are coming out at 21, 22, sometimes after just 3 years. It's more of a sort of an old school traditional, like, come out after your true sophomore year or true junior year situation. So they have development left ahead of them. It's all just kind of like, what are you looking for? What's the fit? And how much can you live with the developmental parts of their game? And the running back class in particular, I thought I loved it a month ago and really liked some of the guys that I saw at Mobile but it's the same thing. They all have traits that attract you. And then you start to dig in and watch, get the big picture. It's like, this guy's he's not an every down back. I don't see a lot of every down backs in this class, which is one of the reasons I like the Emmanuel Wilson signing, because that's a meat and potatoes, no nonsense, physical, inside the tackles runner that's going to give you the floor that you might need to go along with the other guys in the room. And then you got to chase upside in this draft, because you're not going to find a rookie starter.
Yeah, the thing that is fine about Emmanuel Wilson is you can dress and he can play tomorrow. He's a competent running back in the NFL. And some people with Green Bay really liked him. I think you're not going to see that upside there. I think you saw his contract. It's like 1 year, $2 million. And I think that's pretty telling of where his value is. So, but he's a physical back that can come out and play. And he reminds me a lot of like just Charbonnet light. He doesn't have that explosive gear, but he can be really good in short yardage. He's competent. He can catch the ball and he can block. So,
and he loves the Seahawks. They're his favorite team.
There we go. And so that one, it did make sense. Like if you need him and you start him up with Helani and McIntosh, you can play tomorrow. There aren't spots like last year at left guard where they couldn't play. Like last year going into the year, they would have had Christian Haynes as their left guard starter at this point last year, and we didn't even know what Anthony Bradford was. So they were at disaster zone. The edge group is interesting because they got to get younger. Like they're an old group. Nwosu's in the last year of his deal. Maybe he'll get an extension still. DeMarcus Lawrence, who knows? We don't know if he'll be back next year. I saw your report the other day, but I assume he's not going to be back next year.
Yeah, until we hear from him. But
I'm just saying, for the year after 2026,
sure.
I assume you have to assume he's going to be gone, and then Derek Hall has to get paid. So it's a very uncertain group. In an ideal sense, you would love to put a younger edge in there, but a couple things to know. Like when you're drafting an edge at the bottom of the first round or the second round, it's a flawed player. Like edge rushers are so pushed up the draft, they're so overvalued. And that's where you ended up with a Boye Mafe, who was kind of a raw project, who's a little older. Derek Hall, who didn't have a big pass rush. He's more of a run stopper. He's more of a power player, but didn't have the pass rush acumen. And you saw with both of them, their first year, they barely contributed. It's a really tough position. Going from college to pro at that spot is really hard. Unless you're a freak athlete or have incredible. I heard Von Miller on the Rich Eisen show, and they were asking why he's still playing. And he said, my moves still work. And he had 9.5 sacks last year. And
great answer.
For these young guys who are athletes and they're flawed, they don't know the ins and outs of that spot. And with a lot of these second-round edge guys, the hit rate's pretty low to begin with, number one. And number two, it takes them a year. So if you're in this window and you're trying to replace what Boye Mafe did, I think that you're going to need some veteran help in there. And that's where I think that list you showed. And I think most of those guys are going to stick around the market. And if the draft gets away from you, then you go get, or maybe you get both.
Yeah, and I've played with some scenarios. If you trade down and pick up enough picks, I think a minimum of 6 or 7. When I've gotten to where I feel comfortable, like double dipping an edge, right? You take a guy higher in the draft that you think can contribute early, who maybe has some more run defense profile, and then maybe you take a flyer later on a guy, with a ton of upside. The thing I find in studying this edge class is there isn't a complete player in the entire class, and I can't remember a draft where we've seen that. There's usually a couple of no doubt like top 10, top 15 guys, but you're either the power physical edge setting prototype that can get to the quarterback, but through power, which might fit into Mike McDonald defense. I'm thinking about a guy like Zion Young in that case. And then there's a whole bunch of guys that are undersized, that are really quick and have a lot of bend, but they're really limited in their pass rush repertoire, and they struggle against the run, and they operate out of a 2-point stand-up stance, and they're not asked to drop and cover very often. There aren't a lot of guys that are kind of in the middle. I mean, Derek Moore might be kind of the closest that I feel like of that group, and even he's projected to last until the late second round. But it's frustrating from that standpoint. And look, the reality might be that when they get down to it, they might not be in love with any of these guys, at least not enough to take them high. And they might be looking at 2 of these veterans after the draft. It just might have to be a stopgap year at that position, which I know is going to frustrate fans.
It will, but you can't just pull defensive ends out of thin air. Like you saw what happened in the market.
In Baltimore.
You saw what happened in the market though. Like Jack's Odafe made $25 million a year. Boye made $20 million a year. Boye was your 4th edge rusher last year with 2 sacks.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And so, are you going to pay for those guys? I doubt. I'm sure Schneider was talking about some surprises. I'm guarantee they saw some of those edge. Jalen Phillips made $30 million a year. Yeah, and that was a guy you could have got at the deadline last year for a 3rd-round pick.
Yeah, with that injury history, that's a ton of money. And
those guys are getting way overpaid in the market. And I sound like Schneider all of a sudden, but they're not going to pay a 4th edge
new
rusher.
Guards. Yeah,
they're not going to pay a 4th edge rusher $30 million or $20 million. And so, when you're drafting 32, historically, the edge rushers go in the 1st round, or you got to find flyers later in the draft. if you look at the history of like second round edge rushers, there's not a lot there because if you're same with second round quarterbacks, right? If you're a quarterback and you're going in the second round, there's something pretty flawed about you. Jalen Hurts is one of the only real examples of that working. And I don't know how many other second round quarterbacks, like we saw Will Levis go in the second round, and his career, Geno Smith, and those guys have had up and down, mostly down careers.
Yeah.
And that's typically what happens. And so, yeah, you're right. Like Zion Young, he's a decent power rusher and you can make a case for him, but are you that excited about him? He's a limited player. And
got a different personality too. Not sure he's a Seahawk fit.
But yeah, he had the DWI, and I was at his podium. He came off. I'm trying to think of the word. He wasn't like.
He's very animated. He's very.
Yeah, he was very like. I don't know. Yeah, I can't think of the exact word, but he was like kind of cocky, but kind of sounded a little unsure of how to answer some questions, and it wasn't the best first impression for me. Someone asked me what I thought right out of him. I was like, yeah, I didn't love that guy. But when we were walking around the floor, one thing we were told by one of the main draft guys who was at the podium was that scouts really like him and they really like his playing style. And so Derek Moore was a guy that we were watching his film and we didn't love him. And they're like, well, scouts like that he's good at everything. He's not great at one thing at all. That's why he's going to go second, third round. But he's the guy you can put him. But that's kind of what AJ Epinesa was, who's had a pretty milquetoast career so far. And Derek Hall was a pick a lot of fans weren't happy about at the time. And I think because of his physical size, he's been able to develop. And I think of being around DeMarcus Lawrence and Aiden Dirty, and they've really developed him. But as a prospect, he wasn't very exciting. He was like the Will Anderson knockoff, but Will Anderson has turned into a way better pro than a lot of people even thought.
Yeah, Hall was a one-trick pony. He had the single arm power move.
He had the power move, and that was it.
Which he could use on either side, and I thought that was interesting. But he's
developed into a better pro.
Yeah.
I remember some people were pretty pissed at that pick, and
to your point about why edge is such a need, and they need to hit on at least one of these young guys. And look, we're not even talking about maybe Connor O'Toole is going to make a more significant contribution this year. Like we just really don't know. There's not a lot to go on, but it's even Derek Hall is under. He's entering the last year of his deal, and now based on what we just saw Boye Mafe get, is he a $20 million a year edge player on the open market? Like they really do need to stack up some answers there moving forward. Almost forgot about this. Good thing I got the action green highlighted in the background here, but happy St. Patrick's Day to everybody.
Jesus, I'm old, man. I didn't. That went over my head.
Yeah, I'm so unaware of like even that it's that time of year because I just don't get into the whole St. Patrick's Day thing.
I used to love it. I have a kid now. I'm tired all the time. I didn't even know it was March 17th.
2017. I was the GM at Ozzy's in Lower Queen Anne, if you're familiar with that big, huge bar in Seattle. And my owners took me out that day. We ran in the St. Patrick's Day, like the Leprechaun Run or whatever it is through Seattle. Went to Pesos afterwards, and I tried to keep up with those guys. You know how bar owners are. Tried to keep up with them that day. Have not done anything remotely resembling partying or going out on St. Patrick's Day since, and never will again. So that was my final foray into that. Let's see if we got some questions before we let you go here. Thanks for taking the time and throwing this together quick. Let's see. Oh, I want to ask you about this. Okay. Last year at this time, we were talking about one thing and one thing only. And that was, at least as it relates to the draft. We were still trying to wrap our heads around the quarterback change and DK being traded and all that. But the offensive line, that was the entire focus last year heading into the draft. We haven't mentioned it once, and we're 43 minutes into this episode.
That's crazy.
I've spent a lot of time here talking about the need for continuity. We got to talk to Brian Baldinger at the Senior Bowl. He said the same thing. He said his preference would be to bring the same five back. He thinks Bradford is really improved. And yet some fans still want to talk about offensive line. Got a comment here. We don't need left guard Zabel, outplayed even the vets left guard in the league last year. But just how do you feel about the offensive line group as it pertains to this draft? I expect them, if the board falls a certain way, there's probably guys that they would like. I actually like the need, if there's pick capital to pull it off, of maybe one more guy that could play center or guard that can compete. But do you think they might surprise us still and be a little more aggressive in those first 3 picks, perhaps, and try to find someone to compete with Bradford?
I would not be surprised. Again, if the board falls a certain way and there's a guard they like, I think they would pull the trigger for a couple of reasons. One, Bradford's in the last year of his contract coming up this year. I would be pretty surprised to see him re-signed. Two, I think John Benton, the offensive line coach, from what I understand, he would prefer working with younger players than veterans. And I think they've kind of they didn't really target a lot of veterans last year. I'm guessing the market kind of got away from them if they had guys they liked this year. But like Wyatt Teller signed today, $8 million. Not a ton of money, but that eats up into a comp pick potentially. But yeah, I think absolutely. I think I would not be surprised if that was a pick. I think they had to know that Bradford's been up and down. I think they've done really well from a development standpoint, but it's probably the last year Bradford will be on the team. I'd be very surprised if they extend him, given some of the players they have to extend next year and all the draft picks they have coming.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's going to be a priority. I think the draft lines up perfectly well with their need. Edge, corner, and running back probably are their first 3 picks. But I think there's one area they could pivot. I think that's it. Because receiver, it seems like they're kind of tied up now with Shaheed coming back. That would have been an interesting draft area for sure. But like say they love Jennings Dunker, maybe that becomes a consideration at 32. I don't know. I look at the super chat. I literally just said it. So
yeah,
I think it's in play. I don't think it's like priority number 1, but
yeah.
I think it was Brian that put it in a tweet that I think they're bringing all 13 of their O-linemen back.
Yeah. So I should have this ready for today, but I looked into that last week and just generally on defense, they had 16 players play 400 or more snaps last year. And I'm rounding up, Jaron Reed played 398. So 16 players played 398 snaps or more last year. 13 of them are back. We only lost 2 guys that were either starters or part-time starters. On offense, it's even more pronounced. The running back position is the only position that doesn't return someone that played 700 snaps. And that's obviously because they split carries. So outside of the running back position, the entire offense comes back intact plus depth. It's remarkable continuity and consistency for a Super Bowl team. Yeah.
The super chat is dead on. When the Clint Kubiak stuff was coming out, the number one thing that freaked me out was John Benton.
Mm-hmm.
And I look, we've all been through the Seahawks O-line thing. It's been 10 years of almost misery where every year you're just hoping it gets better and they bring in these new coaches and it's the same damn problem.
And some fans are still hanging on to the perception that they're not good. We got a comment here from Space for the Win. He said, first he started off saying our O-line was one of the last. He said, I think it was 30th worst. That is incorrect by every single measure and metric. I think even if you cherry pick the metrics to shed the worst light on that offensive line, they're top 12, top 15 in just about every single category. One of the more dramatic position group improvements I can remember seeing year to year.
Yeah, and the fact that they did that with 5 homegrown players and guys who Abe Lucas had been barely able to stay healthy, and they had a rookie left guard and a center who had never really played a full season.
Yeah, and
to put that group together and make it not only a competent line, but a pretty solid. I wouldn't say they were a great line or anything like that. They weren't the Eagles line a few years ago.
I still feel like they had to keep a 6th guy in too often. Imagine what this offense could be if they could run more 5-man protections. And I think that's where we get into conversations about Bradford is they made this work and he was actually an asset at times, certainly in the run game late in the year. But there were still some shortcomings in pass protection that caused them to have to sort of make up for that. I do think that if the right guy falls to him, if he's able to trade down and add a few picks, if they get to like 6, all of a sudden my view changes. And especially on day 2, I'm on the lookout for, it's a pretty deep interior offensive line class. There's some guys that I really like all the way into like the 4th round. So
and I think there's no other area they could impact the team more than upgrading the O-line, because I think that would diminish the need of running back a little bit. I think it would help in pass protection, which would help with some of your receiver investments. And when they're getting like a 4th edge, unless that hits and becomes a blue chip pass rusher, I think the offensive line group and just raising the ceiling of that with a new OC and a new running back, I think that would have a bigger impact on your team than a corner or than a receiver or a running back.
And I just want to apologize to Space for the win. He was talking about 3 years ago. I lost some context.
3 years ago, they would have been in the bottom
He was actually pointing out the improvement. It was the point he was trying to make.
Even the year with Grubb and Huff, that was one of the worst offensive line I had seen. So Space for the win. You're dead on, because last year when they had Stone Forsythe playing and Abe Lucas was out, and they had Bradford playing, who was not coached very well, and they had Connor Williams snapping the ball over people's heads.
Jeez, yeah.
And the left guard was
LaDainian Tomlinson.
Laken Tomlinson. He played like LaDainian Tomlinson playing guard.
He was about
Charles Cross didn't have a great year, I'll be honest. And that group was hard to watch. Like, you watched the Jets game 2 years ago and watched them play at the goal line.
Oh, it was 9 tries from inside the 5.
Yeah, it was an utter disaster.
Yeah.
And they didn't sign a guard, and the work that Benton did. And so a lot of people thought Zabel was one of the best rookies in the entire league. I know PFF didn't agree with that, but like, just watching how competent he was and how he upgraded the spot. And yeah, I think ideally they need another right guard. I think the team knows that, but it's the hardest position to fill in the whole league. The whole league needs right guard. So.
I have been maintaining, though, I think they're really high on Bryce Cable-Dew, and I saw enough in camp last year to think that there's a chance. I think he's going to be given the opportunity to compete with Bradford this year, and it wouldn't surprise me if he beats him out. Wouldn't surprise me if he wouldn't. I think one thing that gets lost in the Bradford narrative is he's been in the league 3 years, and all 3 years under 2 different head coaches and 2 different coordinators and offensive line coaches, or 3 different offensive line coaches. Yeah. He's won the starting job week 1 all 3 years. So coaches clearly think of him differently than we do. But I do think they really like Cable-Dew. I think his athletic profile matches the scheme. And now a full year of playing on the inside after playing tackle at Kansas, I think there's an opportunity there, and they might see him as an option.
Exactly.
Yeah. Hard to know. I like this one. This is a good one to end on. Even you always need dudes. That's a good mantra to be repeating as we go into the draft. You know, you hear fans sometimes say, "Oh, we don't need this or that because we're set." Well, I think a lot of fans said that last year about the edge group, and now here we are talking about how it's on very thin ice and could fall apart, like one or 2 injuries, and now you're scrambling mid-season to find someone on a practice squad or make a trade. So it is a fickle life in the NFL.
Yeah, things come. Look at the Eagles; like they had like the most unstoppable offensive line.
Yep.
And now
Dickerson and Johnson go down. Whole different story.
And Jeff Stellin is gone, and all of a sudden that's potentially their Achilles heel. So change is quick, man.
Got a super chat here from Taker610. Thanks for the $5 donation. He makes the point that, there's value at the top of the second round. He says Carson Schwessinger and Nick Emenwari were right there at the top of the second last year. So hopefully 32nd overall could still get us a real star. The thing about 32 that I find fascinating in this draft is if they are unable to find a dance partner and move down into the second round. And I think it'll be telling. And I'm trying to think of if we get to 3 weeks before the draft and the Seahawks haven't announced a draft party, it probably means that they're pretty confident they're going to be able to trade down. They've done that in previous years. They're not going to throw a big event and then and have nothing for people to celebrate. But if they can't move down, I think 32. Maybe I'm wrong because of that corner class, and we would like any of them that they take. But it might be ripe for a surprise. Because then you're looking at taking a guy that most people, might have ranked lower. And then you get criticism for he's not a first round pick. I just think it's a different ballgame when you're sitting at 32 in a bad class.
Yeah. And I think it was the Paul Richardson year where they took him in the second round where they were at 32 and they did have the draft party and they're all in there. And then they ran down on the clock. So yeah. I don't know if they want to do that again. And all the people who are going to be doing draft streams are going to be on there for 4 or 5 hours and get a pick. So, 32 this year is not 32 last year. We have to remember that. A first round pick this year is not always the same. Draft classes are important. Even when you do mocks, there's no Emenwari you're probably looking at. There's no Schlesinger.
Although everybody's trying to make Emmanuel McNeil-Warren into Nick Emenwari. I feel like he's a good prospect, but I feel like some team might make a mistake thinking that because it's one of the biggest narratives of this draft season nationally is
Oh,
every team, they were talking about it a lot in the combine coverage, every team is looking for their Nick Emenwari. And you know what that leads to? It leads to reaches, it leads to busts and, pushing guys up the board. I find this an interesting question, maybe not specifically for the player themselves. Scott Fedelmissy asked, if Caleb Banks slips to 32, do you squash need and take the upside? Banks is a guy that was projected top 15 for a while, but he lost a bunch of weight before the combine, didn't test as well. Now he's got another injury. I think he had to have surgery again. Forget about Banks specifically, but is there anyone in this draft that if they fell to 32 would blow up everything we talked about in regards to the corner class and cause them to go in a surprising direction? I've got one, but I want to know if there's a guy.
Like the player I loved coming into the draft class when I first started studying it is like long gone out of their range now. And so that was Dylan Thieneman. And so
that was the guy I was going to say too.
That was the guy, like when I started just diving into this class after the Super Bowl, I'm like, yeah, this guy reminds me of Eric Weddle. And that was a guy that literally Mike McDonald was talking about, one of the best coaches, one of the best players he's ever coached in terms of just understanding football. And when I started liking him, I saw Daniel Jeremiah put out a mock and he went 17 overall. And I'm like, oh, God. And then I talked to him at the combine. He had met with the Seahawks. And I'm like, okay, maybe there's a chance. And now we're seeing him go at like 10 or 12. And if he makes it to 32, that's the guy. Like, you lost Kobe Bryant. If you want to replace that guy, he can play all over the field. He reminds me a lot of, some people have said Harrison Smith, because it's obviously because they're white, but Eric Weddle's the guy I loved back in the day in the draft. That was like one of the first drafts I ever watched. And
McDonald will name drop Waddle unprovoked when talking about some of his favorite players he's ever coached. Yeah.
He was there together in Baltimore. So he was even able to come off the street for that Rams Super Bowl a couple years ago. And we don't want to talk about that, but this is what Thieneman reminds me of. So if him or that's the guy, like, I don't think Dunker, I see suggested Dunker is still a second round prospect. Like, he's not a guy that would blow up their plan. Like, I think you're just taking him because you like him. Quinn Menners, which similar profile, he went in the third round.
Yeah. I have one, since you stole my Thieneman pick, because I think if they value Swiss Army knives and guys that are versatile, can do unique things. And if you're thinking this draft is light on complete players, then you want to bank on traits and you want to shoot for upside. And this guy's kind of projected. He's all over the place. I see him top of the second round, sometimes late second round. But if a guy like Anthony Hill Jr. is there and they're stuck at 32, like, I think he has such a unique athletic profile and skill set. He's a former safety, converted to off-ball linebacker, but also plays some edge. And the thing that intrigues me about him the most is he's got all that different experience level, but he's also built like a guy, not unlike, I think he's a poor man's Arvell Reese in some respects, where you can see him like being an edge almost full-time, maybe even convert him and do that thing. I can see McDonald looking at that guy and seeing just, he could be like Nick Emenwari on steroids. Now I've got two guys that I can move around and play in a real diverse manner. Maybe Emenwari even plays some more deep safety this year. If they're going to surprise us and throw a real curveball and something that nobody is projecting, I could see a guy like that getting their interest.
Yeah, like they love just having the ability to be versatile. I think that's what appealed to them so much about Emenwari. And I think Mike spent a lot of time trying to figure out, how do I stop Shanahan and McVay? I think that was a big part of their planning last year. Matt LaFleur had their number with him the first time. So I think that was part of why Emenwari was, and I think Mike even admitted they kind of fell in love with him at the combine.
Yeah.
And I don't think he was on their radar when they saw a guy that big run that fast and jump like that. I'm guessing that set them back. So yeah, there was probably some guys, and a lot of guys didn't work out this year at the combine. So there weren't but the guys who did, they're the freaks. They're probably going higher in the draft now. So it's hard to figure out who's that like freakish guy they can be with them. And I don't know. I have trouble putting the name together.
Yeah. Richard Bennett says they can afford to be aggressive with 32 or get a running back by moving up on day 2. Tough to do when you only have 4 picks. You're not going to want to give up a 2027 pick to move up in this draft, I don't think. But also, we talked a little bit about the running back class, but I just don't see any guys Now, all it takes is one, right? If they fall in love with Jadarian Price, he might be the one guy. I think he's the closest to having sort of a complete skill set, although he certainly is a developmental prospect in many ways too. But to move up for a running back who isn't going to contribute for you as an every down back as a rookie, I feel like is bad process. But I also feel like the fact that these running backs are all sort of incomplete in some way, shape, or form just kind of plays into the idea of taking one that you really like as a fit later. That's why I'm so intrigued by the top 30 visit by Roman Hemby from Indiana. I hadn't really studied him until I saw that news. And then you go watch him, even his time at Maryland before he went to Indiana. And you're like, okay, if we can get that guy in the 4th or 5th round, if we trade down and pick up extra picks for the same value, he might end up being as long run as a guy that you would take in the 2nd.
Yeah, you think of a lot of the running backs that are pretty competent in the NFL. A lot of them were day 3 picks or late day 2 pick, like Ave S, who's the apple to a lot of people's eye right now, was picked in the end of the 3rd round, and like Kyron Williams is a 5th rounder. That's where you could historically find pretty good running backs. And
Mickey and Silver asked about A-Chain, says, with Waddle being traded to the Broncos today, do you think it makes more of a possibility that A-Chain could be moved? There was some buzz at the trade deadline from Tony Pauline that the Seahawks were interested in Devin A-Chain. He's a perfect fit for this scheme. But it just, to me at this point, it makes no sense. Well, first of all, I guess to answer the question, I think it'd be stupid for the Dolphins to hang on to A-Chain and not cash in on his value right now, given what they've obviously decided is the direction of the franchise to tear it all down. And despite the fact that they've been very vocal over the last month in saying they value him, they want to keep him, they want to extend him, investing in a running back after what we just saw Kenneth Walker get on the open market for a team that's going to be in a long rebuild doesn't make sense. They should trade him. I just don't think it makes sense for the Seahawks to basically give up a draft pick for a rental, because if you're not going to pay Ken Walker on the open market, you're not going to pay Devin A-Chain.
Yeah, and look, I love Devin A-Chain. I think he's a perfect fit for the scheme, but you just nailed it. If you're the Seahawks and option A is pay Ken Walker, option B is trade a draft pick and probably decent compensation for the right to pay A-Chain more money, that's hard to wrap your head around. And sure, he is an upgrade, but you got to say you're going to get a 5th rounder for Walker next year. You're probably going to have to give up your late 2 to get A-Chain.
Yeah,
I don't know if I'm doing that. You would give it up for 1 year of A-Chain and let him walk and take the 4th next year.
This viewer said I would give up a 2nd in this draft for 1 year of A-Chain. Yeah.
Nah, I think you want a sustainable plan of some sort. I don't know if you want to keep doing this 1 year comp pick thing. I think if you're trading a 2nd rounder, you want more than a year of A-Chain. You want to sign him.
Yeah, it would have to be like, and this is the answer to any potential move, right? If the price is right. Like if you trade down and pick up extra picks and the Dolphins are motivated enough to move him and don't want to come out of the draft with him still on the roster, and he drops down to where it's maybe a 3rd. I don't even know what it would be that would entice me, but maybe so many things would have to fall a certain way, I think, for this to really make sense. Yeah. Or you could just draft him on Claiborne out of Wake Forest in the 4th round, and
it's just
similar skill set in addition to the other guys in the room. So
it feels like fan fiction, the whole A-Chain thing.
It does, understandably so. Like,
yeah. Like we need a running back. They're tanking.
It would be a perfect fit. Yeah. And I also think it leads to I think it's a good kind of a note to end on. Well, actually I have one more question for you, but I just think that, we do forget sometimes when we get so deep into free agency in the draft, we get all enamored with like, what additions could we have? We want the new shiny toy that oftentimes the Seahawks like their backup players and their developmental players more than we think. And when John Schneider brings up George Halani on his radio show without being prompted, that says something about how he feels about him. And they may feel a similar way about Ken McIntosh, although he didn't love his answer about how he's doing physically.
Yeah.
Turns out maybe that wasn't a simple ACL. It was the first we kind of heard about that. The final question though is, we saw the Rams be super active early in the process, and then they kind of shut it down because once they traded for Trent McDuffie and signed Jalen Watson and brought back Cam Curl, like it's pretty shocking. I think it was March 12th when they finished all those moves. And I was like, okay, the Rams are done. Like they can take the next 6 weeks off and come back for the draft. Did they slightly, just where we are today on March 17th, comparing roster to roster, did they make up that ground against Seahawks, or maybe you feel like the Seahawks roster is slightly behind the Rams? Where do you think they fit?
I think they probably would be a little. I think you would have to project them. I think they're the team that gave Seattle, even last year, the most trouble. They had two pretty significant holes last year that ultimately took them down. The cornerback group, a lot of teams took advantage of, and they obviously aggressively spent to fix that. The question that really hasn't been fixed, and we don't know, is the special teams. And Sean McVay historically and Kyle Shanahan, the same thing. They don't value special teams. Mike McDonald does. And they've really put an emphasis on the players they've re-signed in the open market, special teams. And Xavier Smith fumbles that punt, and they give a lot of the touchdown to Shaheed. They fired the special teams coach. They hired Bubba Ventrone from Cleveland. That's the question about their team I still linger. Because on paper, yeah, I think they're slightly a little more complete at this point. They didn't have a very good 2022 draft, so they haven't had many guys to sign. Like the Seahawks crushed the 22 draft. The next year, the Rams have a ton of free agents. Kobe Turner, Puka.
Yep.
This is a huge offseason for them coming up. They have a 38-year-old quarterback. So, look, last year I thought Stafford was trending towards being cooked. And I don't think there's anything I got more wrong in the league because he came out and was the MVP of the league. And so I don't want to get into the business of projecting what 38-year-old Matt Stafford's going to do. So I feel like if I lean into him again, maybe he takes a step back. Or if I say the same thing, he might make me look stupid. So much of their team just comes down to him. Like on paper, I think they're more complete than Seattle right now. I think that's fair. I think McVay's the one coach that's given McDonald trouble in a lot of different situations. McVay, they've had weird matchups where the team that dominates the side of the ball they're supposed to has that ultimately lost the game like 5 times in a row. It's the weirdest stat about those two. They've played 5 matchups against each other in the last 4 years. The side of the ball that's dominated the game has lost. McVay's every time, and when McVay won this year, that was their bad offensive game.
Mm-hmm.
It's been, and then the great game the Seahawks had on defense, they lost, and they won the games where they played like crap against them on defense. It's the weirdest matchup going. But yeah, I think they are the betting favorite. I think that's justified. I think they've made moves in free agency that the Seahawks frankly haven't. But I think I'm still betting on Mike McDonald right now.
Yeah, it seems like a smart bet, as I am too. Jeff, really appreciate you on short notice, taking the time and hopping on. Glad we can make up for the miss last week. You can see Jeff on Real Hawk Talk and the work he does with Rob Staten as well. Enjoy the rest of this draft process. We'll get together again before the season starts and chat again.
I hope so, man. It's just going to be a fun next 6 weeks or whatever.
In the meantime, guys, follow me on Twitter at Seahawks Forever. Subscribe to the channel if you would, please. Forever and always go Hawks. Thanks for watching today.